The Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call recess at any time. And I'm actually going to follow the ranking member's example here and surrender both of my devices. Set maybe the sort of example we want to set for our students. Good morning and welcome to the Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education. This committee has several members who have been classroom teachers ourselves, myself included. But what a teacher faces today is in many ways unrecognizable from the classrooms that we all sat in or even the ones that we taught in. Screens are now pervasive, mostly in the form of student cell phones, drawing attention away from interactive discussion and instruction. Too often, students spend most of their days with their heads down, thumbs scrolling, and only a fraction interacting with increasingly discouraged teachers. Students spend lunch sitting side by side, but interacting with their phones rather than their peers. We know that thoughtful, focused use of education technology can be tremendously beneficial for students. For example, students can use sensors and apps to gather evidence for investigations and do research faster than ever. This very subcommittee, just a couple months ago, examined the use of AI and its really unlimited potential to increase student achievement. And I've been a huge advocate for the potential that AI offers in our classrooms. But, and we talked about this to some extent at that hearing, research shows that there are downsides here when it comes to fixating and excessive use of specific devices. Research shows that students are spending an average of 90 minutes per school day on their own devices during instructional time. This contributes to the 8.5 hours a day the average high schooler spends on his or her cell phone. I mean, think about that. 8.5 hours per day on their phone. These are devices, and we're thinking about smartphones here, that didn't exist 20 years ago. And so you have that number going from 0 to 8.5 hours within the span of a generation. Teachers report that students hurry sloppily through assignments so that they can go back to their social media posts or YouTube channels, not engaging in the learning process. Students starting in elementary school huddle around phones where students share videos with their friends who don't have phones, sometimes exposing children to inappropriate content. Cyberbullying originating at school is contributing to mental health issues among our youth. And cheating has become rampant. We must ask ourselves why student achievement has declined in our country and why, for example, only 28% of our 8th graders are proficient in math and only 30% are proficient in reading. We've been asking ourselves these questions. I think there are many causes, but this is certainly one of them. It is not just personal cell phones that can cause problems in our classrooms. School-issued devices are overutilized, with middle schoolers spending almost 2.5 hours a day on school-issued screens, creating eerily quiet classrooms with little student-to-student or teacher-to-student interaction. Parents in my district agree that screen time needs to be limited. A recent survey revealed that 40% of parents believe that screen time should be limited to academic use only, used strictly for academic work, and personal devices should stay off. Another 34% of parents surveyed said there should be structured device periods where students can use any device during a set time, the rest of the day being screen-free. Less than 3% of the parents we surveyed said students should have full access to devices throughout the school day. So this is an issue where parents, I think, are really moving towards the view that we need to have some limitations at least in place. So how can we balance helpful time on screens with strategies that have been proven through brain research to increase comprehension? Strategies like reading from paper and writing notes by hand can help. And rich Socratic conversation that allows students to hear a variety of perspectives, not just a feed based on their algorithms, can also help. We need to listen to what the science is telling us about how screens affect brain development. Not only does too much screen time affect students, but having to continually compete with cell phones for students' attention contributes heavily to teacher stress and burnout. Studies show that almost half the cell phone policies that do exist are not enforced by school leaders, leading to struggles between teachers and non-compliant students. The #1 issue causing teacher dissatisfaction is student behavior and discipline. 55% of teachers are thinking of leaving the profession earlier than they had planned. So if we want to keep good teachers in the classroom, we should start by supporting efforts to increase classroom engagement. Today, we want to hear about the status of state and district-based restrictions and limitations on phones and how effective those restrictions are. We also want to highlight research-based practices of schools that have struck a balance between technology and interactive teaching in the interest of advancing student learning to create curious learners and productive citizens. Teachers and parents believe this is a community problem that can be solved by having a culture that balances the use of technology in the classroom with proven methods of instruction that encourage active student engagement, good mental health, good relationships, and quality instruction. We on the committee agree, and we look forward to hearing what steps are being taken to stem the tide of screens overtaking our classrooms. With that, I'll yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. We appreciate your time and your expertise. We all want students to grow up and learn in a safe and healthy environment where they're protected from harm and equipped with the tools and knowledge they need to thrive in a rapidly changing world. And now that cell phones, laptops, and tablets have become an integral part of our everyday lives, schools need to be equipped with the latest technology and high-speed internet. Being fluent in technology is a necessity, not a luxury, especially when students will be entering the workforce in a modern global economy. But access to and use of technology must come with guardrails. Research shows that unrestricted or unmonitored screen time is likely to have a negative consequence on students' mental health as well as their learning and development. I noted the part in the testimony where, in the written testimony, where there was a study of students studying on their laptops, and it took them 6 minutes to go from studying to scrolling. And I told that to my son, who was a high school teacher, and he said, "I'm surprised it's that much." So most states, including my home state of Oregon, are working at the state and district level to implement comprehensive policies on this issue. For example, Portland Public Schools recently adopted a district-wide policy requiring all students to have their phones off and other personal electronics off during school hours. They made exceptions, of course, for students with disabilities and approved academic activities. And although I acknowledge the importance of this topic, and it is important, I also note that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and officials in the administration often say that the federal government should not be making decisions for local schools. And as with curriculum decisions, technology policies should be managed by state and local officials. In our role as federal officials, we can and should be supporting that important research, which the chairman mentioned, research-based decisions, the guidance, the partnerships, the professional development on this topic, which is especially important to small and rural school districts that might not have the staff or the resources or the research they need to draft effective policies. Again, this is an important topic, but I hope we don't lose sight of the other many issues that are clearly within our committee's control and jurisdiction and how they affect students as well. For example, the Trump administration's actions coupled with several harmful proposals in the congressional Republicans' I call the big bad ugly bill pose a significant and urgent threat to students' well-being and academic achievement. The testimony we're going to hear today explains that as we have seen an increase in screen time, we have also seen an increase in need for behavioral health care. But earlier this year, and without warning, the Trump administration canceled more than $1 billion in funding for student mental health services that were funded through the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. These programs ended without notice to states and without recourse to help students who depend on them. The grants provided funding for mental health professionals, for support services, for suicide prevention resources, for schools and districts that desperately need them. Portland Public Schools use these grants to fund 21 school psychologists. They provided more than 8,000 mental health services to students during the 23-24 school year. Moreover, the administration's plans to eliminate the Department of Education will have significant consequences for schools and public education as we know it. It will deepen the inequity and instability we're already seeing across our public education system. Also, the department recently reportedly dismissed all of the employees in the Office of Education Technology. Among other things, this office assisted districts and states in implementing best practices for technology, such as how to effectively use screens and other devices in schools. And lastly, but perhaps most urgently, this big, bad, ugly bill that my colleagues across the aisle championed will gut programs that helps kids show up to school ready to learn. Programs that provide food, healthcare, stability to millions of families, and now they're being squeezed to pay for massive tax cuts for billionaires. Well, let me say it plainly. Students can't focus on their schoolwork if they're hungry. Students can't reach their full potential if they're unable to access medical care. So yes, although we are concerned about student screen time, we should also focus on what we can control by asserting our role as members of this committee who were elected by our constituents to engage in oversight of the administration. By restoring the bipartisan mental health funding that many of us voted to authorize, protecting the Department of Education's ability to do that important research and offer guidance to states and local schools about technology, and supporting programs that provide children with food, healthcare, and a safe, supportive school environment. I expect we'll all agree that states have control over screen time, and I appreciate, again, the expertise and time of these witnesses, but I hope we can also work on the urgent challenges that are within our power and jurisdiction so we get to the point where every student has the opportunity to learn and thrive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. 14 days after this hearing. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material noted during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I note for the subcommittee that some of my colleagues who are not permanent members of this subcommittee may be waiving on for the purpose of today's hearing. We'll now move on to introduction of our witnesses. And to introduce our first witness, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Utah, Representative Owens.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Rich Nye, Special Advisor of Education to Governor Spencer Cox in Utah, Salt Lake City. We both represent a remarkable state, number 2 and as best state in education. We're going to be number 1 soon, and number 1 in child online safety. So thank you so much, Dr. Nye. I look forward to your testimony, for sure.
Thanks very much. Our second witness is Dr. Matthew Givens, the Assistant Superintendent for the Richardson Independent School District in Richardson, Texas. Our third witness is Dr. Cheryl Holcomb McCoy, the President and Chief Executive Officer for the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education here in Washington, D.C. And our fourth witness is Dr. Jean Twenge, a Professor of Psychology at San Diego State University in San Diego, California. We thank the witnesses for being here today and look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 3-minute summary of your written statement. As committee members have many questions for you, the clock will count down from 3 minutes. However, pursuant to committee rule 8D and committee practice, we'll not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I would also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of your responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I'll first recognize Dr. Nye for your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today, and thank you for tackling such an important topic. As stated, my name is Rich Nye, and I serve as the Senior Advisor for Education Policy to Governor Spencer J. Cox. In my previous life, I was a superintendent of the Granite School District, one of the largest districts in the state of Utah, serving over 60,000 students across 87 schools. On one hand, we acknowledge that smartphones offer unparalleled access to information and can be a valuable learning tool. However, the overwhelming evidence, as has been noted, points to serious downsides, primarily relentless distraction and detrimental impacts not only on academics, but as well as mental and behavioral health. There is overwhelming national data that cannot be ignored. Nearly 97% of students report using their device during the school day. Adolescents, has been noted, spend an average of 8.5 hours daily on screen-based media. Some researchers have reported that an average student receives 237 daily notifications, and some students, those same adolescents, will receive an astounding 498 notifications or times that they pick up their phone in a single day. This barrage of notifications severely hinders learning, causing students to lose classroom focus within moments of even arriving to the classroom. Our teachers confirm this. It's a major disruption to teaching and learning. Beyond distractions, smartphones are contributing to serious mental health challenges. They provide a pervasive platform for cyberbullying with intensifying harassment through anonymity. Furthermore, excessive smartphone use and associated screen times hinders the development of essential interpersonal skills and limits face-to-face interactions. This can lead to social isolation, impaired communication abilities, and heightened anxiety. Experts even compare cell phone usage to other process addictions, demonstrating how overuse compromises academic and general well-being. This is why I emphasize that taking phones out of classrooms isn't enough. If students are allowed to bury their heads in phones in the hallways or in the lunchroom, rather than engaging with each other, we're missing an opportunity for them to develop the interpersonal skills so critical to growth and success. Recognizing these urgent concerns, Utah has taken decisive action. On January 4th, 2024, Governor Spencer J. Cox urged every school and district leader to remove cell phones from classrooms as a first step. We've already seen positive impacts in schools that have proactively implemented these restrictions, reported improved learning, decreased bullying, and more meaningful student connections. Additional statewide momentum culminated in a follow-up bill this year, which passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, and which prohibits students from using cell phones, smartwatches, or emerging technology during classroom hours. It also allows for exemptions due to exigent circumstances, or when required by a student's individualized educational program, the familiar IEP, Section 504 plan, or upon a medical necessity. My primary message today is that smartphones are an enormously destructive force in education, and states should do everything they can to support policies that keep them away from students, not just in the classroom, but from being used at all during the school day. As we say in Utah, from bell to bell. We're proud of Utah's leadership in working towards this goal. As such, Utah has taken a stand, and at the very least, students will not have unfettered access to smartphones while they are under the care of an educator. This new statewide expectation is a collaborative effort to recenter student attention and learning, foster healthier interpersonal interactions, and mitigate the documented negative consequences of smartphone overuse. By addressing this critical issue, we are creating a more conducive and supportive setting for all students, ensuring their focus remains squarely on their learning and development. Furthermore, schools and districts are also analyzing the amount of screen time students experience on school-provided devices, with one district already limiting the amount of screen time to an average of 30 minutes a day. There's a clear commitment to establishing a better balance for the use of technology and screen time in Utah's classrooms. Again, I thank you for elevating this important conversation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gibbons, you're now recognized for your testimony.
Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the committee, it's an honor to speak with you and your colleagues this morning. My name is Dr. Matthew Gibbons. I serve as Assistant Superintendent in the Richardson Independent School District located in Dallas County, Texas. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today about a pressing issue affecting schools nationwide, student cell phone use, and how our district has taken steps to reclaim instructional time, improve school safety, and strengthen student well-being through a phone-free learning environment. Richardson ISD serves approximately 37,000 students across 50 campuses with a student population that is racially and economically diverse. In recent years, we saw firsthand how smartphones were disrupting learning and increasing challenges like cyberbullying, classroom distractions, and student conflict, echoing concerns we know are shared across the country. In fact, our teacher surveys identified phone use as the #1 concern impacting classroom instruction. In response, our superintendent, Ms. Tabitha Branham, asked our team to revise and update a local policy. Based on these changes, we also introduced a practical tool, the Yonder Pouch, to selected campuses. This secure magnetic pouch stores students' phones, smartwatches, and earbuds during the school day, keeping them accessible after school but out of sight during instruction. In our first pilot at a junior high school, the results were immediate and profound. 98% of teachers reported fewer disciplinary issues, and 100% reported more instructional time. Following that success, we expanded to several campuses, including a high school with nearly 3,000 students. We proactively addressed parent safety concerns through community meetings and clear emergency protocols. The feedback and outcomes were encouraging. For example, this year's preliminary data shows suspensions at certain campuses dropped between 15% and 54%. Classroom engagement improved, and teacher retention at one of our Yonder campuses climbed to 94%, with many citing the phone-free environment as a primary reason for staying in the profession. Perhaps most importantly, teachers across all campuses reported regaining more than 10 minutes of instruction per class period. That's over an hour per week per class. That is now focused on student learning and connection. Here's what our educators say, quote, "It's not just about phones, it's about restoring focus, improving relationships, and reclaiming the joy of teaching." One principal told us, "We've gone from fights being filmed and shared on social media to students talking, reading, and laughing together during lunch." While there's no one-size-fits-all solution, our experience demonstrates that with consistent policy, strong communication, and the right tools, schools can meaningfully reduce distractions and improve the learning climate. As this committee considers issues related to student mental health, digital safety, and education outcomes, we hope our model offers a practical, data-informed example of how our particular district policy changes and focus on instructional time in the classroom can support national goals. Thank you for your leadership and commitment to America's students.
Thank you very much. Dr. Holcomb McCoy, you're now recognized for your testimony.
Chair Kiley, Ranking Member Bonamici, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify about such an important topic today. I'm Cheryl Holcomb McCoy, President and CEO of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, or better known as AACTE. Our organization represents over 500 educator preparation programs across the nation, and we graduate more than 120,000 new educators annually, encompassing teachers, school leaders, school counselors, special educators, and other education specialists. As a former kindergarten teacher myself and school counselor, I'm here to discuss really the increasingly urgent and complex issue of screen time and its impact on children's academic and social emotional development, while also highlighting the critical role of well-prepared educators in addressing this growing challenge. And you can please refer to my written testimony for a more detailed analysis. Technology overall can be a powerful tool for teaching and learning. It can personalize instruction, provide access to rich content, and support the learning needs of students with disabilities. As the mother of a daughter with special needs, I've witnessed firsthand how screen-based tools like tablets and communication devices can be positively life-changing. But excessive screen use via smartphones, as mentioned by other panelists this morning, is harming children's development, their mental health, and academic progress. Children as young as 8 now spend 4 to 6 hours daily on screens. Teens average nearly 9. And while some screen time is instructional, much of it is not. And teachers are reporting rising distractions in class, anxiety, and disengagement of students. School mental health providers, counselors, are overwhelmed with cases of depression and behavioral challenges, often linked to social media, digital comparison, and disrupted sleep. Yet, sadly, most educator and counselor preparation programs still do not include training in screen time science, digital wellness, or media literacy. And this, I believe, is a serious gap in the preparation of future educators. So today, I come to you to urge you to consider federal leadership in 4 critical areas that will increase our understanding of children's screen time and to better equip the educators who interact with our children every day. First, investments in educator preparation are needed through federal grant programs such as TQP, SEED, TSL, Hawkins Center for Excellence, and IDA personnel preparation. These grant programs can prioritize outcomes such as students' digital wellness, media literacy, and tech use but also the evaluation of programs that minimize or limit student usage of devices such as cell phones and other devices also in schools. Secondly, restoring school-based mental health grants is so important. These grants, created under the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, enable schools and districts to hire and retain counselors, psychologists, and social workers. Their termination has left districts and teachers and principals and superintendents without the critical support they need for students in crisis, particularly those affected by excessive screen time. These funds must be reinstated. Third, funding of rigorous research through the Institute of Education Sciences, or IES. We need longitudinal term studies on the effects of screen time from cell phones versus other devices, as well as evidence on effective educator training and instructional strategies that result in healthy digital practices. As educators, we deserve and need to know what works. And finally, the issuing of national guidance through the Office of Educational Technology, or OET. OET, in my opinion, should lead the development of age-appropriate, research-informed recommendations on screen use. Its capacity has been severely diminished, and reinvestment is urgently needed. At AACTE, we also support the guidance of ISTE, or the International Society for Technology and Education. ISTE's research-based standards emphasize digital citizenship, empowered learning, and responsible media use. Overall, we must invest in the educators who prepare and support our children in this digital age, ensuring that they are equipped with the best research and practices to face the challenges of excessive screen time. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and partnership on behalf of all students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Twingy, you're recognized for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Bonamici, and other esteemed members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak before you today. So my name is Jean Twangy, and I do research on generational differences and how they're caused by technology. I also just wrote a book for parents called 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. The first smartphone went on sale in 2007. By 2012, the majority of Americans owned one. The years since have resembled a vast experiment, especially on children and adolescents. The results of that experiment have been a disaster. That is especially true in schools where most students can use their phones during the school day. In a large international survey, twice as many students report that they feel lonely at school as did in 2012. Loneliness at school has increased the most in countries where students spend more time using electronic devices for leisure purposes during the school day. Academic performance has also suffered. After rising for 2 decades, U.S. student scores on standardized reading and math tests declined after 2012. Internationally, scores on math, reading, and science also began to decline around 2012. The declines in academic performance are significantly larger in countries where students spend more time using electronic devices for leisure purposes like social media during the school day. The mere presence of a smartphone reduces attention capacity and cognitive performance. In one experiment, students who did not have access to their phones during a lecture scored 13 percentage points higher on a test than those who kept their phones. A study of Norwegian middle schools found that smartphone bans led to improved academic performance, less bullying, and better mental health, especially for girls. And we can put the slide down now. Thank you. Third, students are talking to each other less. When students have access to their phones during breaks and lunch, they are occupied with their devices instead of interacting face-to-face with each other. This is on top of the sharp decline in teens getting together with their friends in person outside of school. That has happened also at the same time that we've had major increases in depression, self-harm, and suicide among our teens that also began around 2012. A Common Sense Media survey found that 1 out of 4 teens watched pornography during the school day. Half of those said they used a school-issued device to do so. That also means other students are inadvertently exposed to adult content at school. My oldest daughter, who just graduated from high school and is now in the Navy, once sat behind a boy watching pornography on his phone in the middle of a high school class. Fifth, access to phones often leads to bullying, fights, and unauthorized filming. In a rural district in Colorado, more than half of student disciplinary issues were due to phones. When the North Adams School District in Massachusetts banned phones during the school day, discipline referrals dropped 75%. 6, teachers find it difficult to teach when students are on their phones. Many are quitting in frustration. 72% of high school teachers say that students being distracted by their phones in the classroom is a major problem. 83% support banning student phone use during the entire school day. Every day is a constant struggle against cell phone usage, said one teacher who quit. We're competing with Netflix, FaceTime texting, they're even watching March Madness, said another teacher. In conclusion, allowing smartphones in schools has been a disaster for our children. For their sake, this vast natural experiment must come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule, and I'll first recognize the Vice Chair of the full committee, Representative Owens.
Thank you, Chairman Connolly, thanks for this very important hearing on the usage and impact of schools and screens in schools. Technology can often be a force multiplier in the workforce. However, we need to better understand the implications when we expose our children to digital devices and what the long-term effects might be. I'm grateful for the witnesses who are here today to talk about this topic and how we can make sure that we're making the best decisions for our children. Dr. Twing, I want, if you wouldn't mind, repeating, you just shared some percentage of children have viewed inappropriate images on devices at schools. Can you share that once again? I want to make sure people understand the impact that we're having in this particular case.
Right, so this was a survey of teens done by Common Sense Media, a really respected organization. And they found that almost 1 out of 4 teens admitted they had watched pornography, inappropriate content during the school day. And half of those who said that they did that did it on a school-issued device.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Nye, you work closely with Governor Cox and other state officials to craft and pass legislation in Utah. What role did officials play in helping to make the case to the public and stakeholders about the need to make these changes?
So it was certainly a collaborative effort, right? So in terms of the officials, you had not only legislators calling for it, parents calling for it, teachers calling for it, everyone saying something needs to be done. And as you know, when you're crafting policy, statewide policy, that becomes very tricky in terms of if it's too prescriptive, then it limits or hinders innovation. But if it's too broad, then of course we're not going to accomplish our outcomes. So our local officials and state leaders got together and said, well, what could this look like for Utah? Put together what was a very collaborative bill in this case. And through the process, we got significant feedback to refine it into something that is a step forward.
And I gather the parents were also a big part of this collaborative effort.
They were, and so much of this policy, though, too, originates at the local level. So there's permissive language in the bill that allows local control for local circumstances, and that's where you'll have a school community council working with a principal, working with the teachers, saying, we understand the statewide expectation is to reduce or eliminate, phones in the classroom, but what else needs to be true at our school regarding that? And then they get to have that discussion and that engagement.
Okay. And are districts and schools supporting teachers when enforcing the smartphone restrictions? And what does that kind of support look like?
I appreciate that. So any good policy or any good rule is only as good as its degree to which it's enforced. And for teachers, especially, they had called out early saying, please help us. It would be great to have a law or a district policy to help do that. So we have something to point to. And that's what they're doing now. And then to the degree administration is able to help when a teacher brings up the issue or they're seeking to enforce what is the expectation when the administration's there, having the conversation with the student, having the conversation with the parents. The teacher does feel supported in that effort and is able to, across the campus have some uniformity of expectation.
You mentioned the Utah Senate Bill 178 received bipartisan support in the state legislation. And what specific ways did partners come together across the aisle to accomplish this?
Yeah, I think with the focus being on what is the impact of cell phones and screen use in schools, the untoward aspects of that, everyone recognized that the common denominator of it was it's hampering educational outcomes and student well-being. And so when we made that the focus, people can get around that. Now, how we get there to addressing it, of course, there's a legislative process to do that. But for that bipartisan support, it was commonly recognized as a statewide issue that smartphones and that associated screen time were hindering what's occurring in our classrooms.
To say the least, the from bill to bill policy is so Utah. Love the innovation, love the collaboration, and I love the fact that we're having this conversation. It's very, very important for our future, for our kids in our future. So thank you so much, and yield back my time.
I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that this is a critical issue and that is bipartisan, but also want to reiterate that the federal government does not play a role in establishing policies. That is up to states and local school districts. But our role could be to be an effective partner for the states through research and guidance, professional development. But those are rendered more unlikely, if not impossible, without the Institute of Education Sciences and the Office of Education Technology at the Department of Education. So we've been talking about academic outcomes and mental health, and it's pretty clear from all of your testimony that we have a critical, serious issue to address with device addiction and why it's so prevalent. But also, we need to talk about the risks of access, but also what can schools do to address it. So we know that this is affecting not only students in urban areas, like I mentioned with Portland Public Schools and their programs funded through the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, but rural districts as well. A small rural school district in Oregon saw a significant improvement in access to behavioral health care for their students when they were able to hire additional social workers with grant funding from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And they recently learned that funding is being turned off, leaving students without the support and counseling they need. So Dr. Holcomb-McCoy, what are additional challenges that rural communities face, and why is that support through bills like the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act so important?
Well, thank you for the question and for your concern about rural communities. The fact is that the American School Counselor Association has a recommendation that there should be one counselor to every 250 students, which is an ambitious ratio. But in rural districts, often counselors have way more than 250 students because they're covering sometimes an entire county, which could be 700, 800, 900 students. The same is true in urban districts. Right now, we are just not hiring enough counselors that can manage the caseload. On top of that, school counselors' work is based in school time, and so the issue of taking students out of instructional time for mental health concerns is also another challenge, that there are not enough mental health providers in rural areas also that are close enough to provide the help that many students need there.
I appreciate that. I remember having a very similar conversation in this very room after Sandy Hook and looking at the lack of school counselors and how important they are. So we've heard pretty overwhelmingly about the positive effects of school phone bans and device bans, but Dr. Holcomb-McCoy, not all studies suggest that a ban is going to lead to improvements in student well-being. Why might that be? Is there a relation to lack of training among educators and administrators? And what will be the consequences of the cuts to research and Title II professional development funding on this issue?
Well, as I said, educators need the training to understand the challenge, as well as how to use technology in a healthy way. Although we're talking about cell phone bans, which I can understand the harm that's associated with that, there are many students that need screen time to connect with friends. In my daughter's case, it was to be able to communicate effectively, needing the time. So it's important for teachers and educators, all educators, leaders in schools, to understand this balance of how to create healthy digital use of technology. I mean,
So we need to get it right.
We need to get it right. It's almost like food. It's like we don't want to eat too much. It's harmful. Too little could be harmful as well. It is moderation that we're seeking for.
Thank you. And Dr. Twenge, I noticed in your testimony something that is, I know it's submitted in your written testimony, but I think it's important to talk about here. We never take off our parent hats when we're parents of kids who are either in school or been through school. And you said some of the strongest opposition has come from parents who are concerned that they won't be able to contact their child if there is an emergency. And I noted Sandy Hook, but there have been many other instances, for example, of gun violence, Uvalde, Parkland. We don't need to list them. There are way too many. So how do you respond to that?
So fortunately, it is a minority of parents who are against the smartphone bans during the school day. The vast majority do support them. But when concerns are brought up, it's very often in that category. What if there's an emergency? In particular, a lot of parents want to know that. So when I give talks at schools, parents will bring that up. Principals say they get that question from parents. Now, it turns out school safety experts are in agreement that students having access to their phones during an active shooter situation is actually more dangerous. So that's for a number of reasons. So for one thing, if they're distracted by their phones, they may not listen to the instructions about where they need to go to keep themselves safe. The noise from those devices can alert shooters to where students are hiding. If they are using those devices, even you'd think maybe, oh, this is comforting to contact their parents, then that causes a bunch of other problems. And the parents are gonna rush to the school. That's gonna block access to police and first responders. And it's gonna tie up bandwidth that those first responders need to respond to the situation.
Thank you. I know I've gone over, but I think it was important to get that on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The representative from Pennsylvania, Mr. McKenzie, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I appreciate everybody being here today. It's an important topic and one that we hear about back in our communities fairly often from concerned parents and educators. So a very important discussion to be had here. Mr. Twenge, I would like to go to you first and just inquire about what we know and what we've learned, or Dr. Twenge, I'm sorry, from other countries. Are there leaders in this field that we can look to who have kind of maybe taken steps more proactively or faster, and what can we take away from those experiences?
Well, one of the things that I described in both my oral and written testimony is a study that's under review by myself and my colleagues, looking at the PISA data set, which is around the world. And it has measured things like loneliness at school, and it also has standardized measures of academic performance in math, reading, and science. And there's a clear pattern that there are some countries where, through restrictions or other means, students are not using their devices during the school day for leisure purposes like social media and texting as much as in other countries. And we see a clear pattern that those countries that where students spend less time on those devices for leisure purposes, better academic performance. Academic performance hasn't declined as much as it has in other countries. It's stayed relatively stable. And that there hasn't been as big of an increase in feelings of loneliness at school. So that gives us the great source of data to look at, that there's different ways of doing this. And you're getting the best outcomes when students are not watching TikTok during class, which I think shouldn't be that surprising.
Thank you. I'll go to Dr. Nye or Dr. Gibbons. Either of you might be able to answer this question. When a school district is going about implementing a policy, and they've come up with what they think is a best approach, they've maybe gone through some hearings with their local communities or school board, how should we look at engagement with parents not only in the development of these policies, but then also the implementation?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. I think as far as our district goes, we have really focused on transparency for everything that we do on a daily basis. I think the tide has really turned from there being a us against them kind of mentality when we're talking about parents and their involvement in their students' education. And so for us, it was definitely the idea of getting the information in front of our parents around what we were doing and why we were doing it. As you mentioned, we had several board meetings where we proposed the policy, we talked about it. We have frequently asked questions on our website. We address the parents' concern around safety. All of those aspects are all on our website, and we're able to offer that information. And secondly, just good old-fashioned face-to-face, sit down and talk with a parent and be available for them to talk through whatever concerns they may have. And our high school principals, when we implemented this policy, were great at that. From a central level, didn't have very many conversations with concerned parents because our high school principals and our junior high principals took care of that, had good conversations, and helped our parents feel at ease.
And after implementation, have you done any follow-up with parents to see what their experience has been, if it's been positive for not only themselves, but also their students?
Yes, sir. This is our third full year of implementation. In the first 2 years, we sent out a survey to our parents and our students and our staff. And so getting that information from our parents, it was very clear that they understood the policy. They knew the reasoning why. There's some general concern around it, which I think we've heard from some of our other colleagues here. But every year we gather that information and try to adjust and offer information or additional sessions around training if we see that there's a spike in some type of a concern, even for a particular campus in general.
Great. And just with the remaining time that I have, so it sounds like you have figured out a great approach that works in your local community, but it could be a model for other school districts. Is there anything that is being put together by either your organization or others that you're aware of that is a model policy, not only in the actual policy, but also that whole development and implementation and feedback program and approach that you just talked about?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. Actually, there is going to be a House Bill 1481 for the state of Texas that will be signed by the governor, or should be signed by the governor, that will help all districts formulate those types of things. So there will be a requirement for a standardized policy. There will be an understanding of what those need to look like, from consequences, all those things, and we're going to be more than happy to work with our state legislators as needed to help with that. Our policy and our process was not perfect, and so we're hopeful to help share our fabulous failures as well and what we want to do to make things better. But as we're moving forward, I think you'll see more unification from that at the state level.
Sounds great. Thank you again, and I yield back.
The representative from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, is recognized.
Good morning. I want to thank our expert witnesses so much for being here today. There is no question that technology has dramatically changed our education landscape and the lives of youth in this country, in some ways for the better and in others for the worst. I personally got my first cell phone in the 7th grade, and I think often about how grateful I am that smartphones were not a thing until college, because growing up is stressful enough as it is, and MySpace and Facebook were stressful enough as it is. So, very important conversation that we're having today. I also do want to note that we are having this conversation while the Trump administration is gutting the Department of Education, cutting funding for research and teacher education grants, and recently announced it was canceling $1 billion in grants to school districts to hire mental health professionals. Since 2010, we have seen a significant rise in mental health concerns among children and adolescents, coinciding with the rapid expansion of social media and screen time. Anxiety, behavioral disorders, and depression have become increasingly prevalent, with 10% of children ages 3 to 17 diagnosed with an anxiety disorder in the U.S. as of the 2021 and 2022 school year. In response to this growing issue, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force updated its recommendations in 2022 to include anxiety screening for children as young as 8 years old. Dr. Holcomb McCoy, given these trends, what do we know about the relationship between screen time and youth mental health, and how should educators, parents, and policymakers approach this issue to better support students?
Well, the research that we have now shows that there is a relationship between screen time and mental health issues, particularly when we think about non-instructional time on social media, such as TikTok and other types of bad content. So that is what we're really concerned about, is the content not being instructional and helpful to a student, and therefore can cause mental health issues, and we're seeing that increase dramatically. We also see what we call comparisons, comparing oneself to others on social media. That is very, very harmful. The consequences can be vast if not treated. And one thing that we're seeing now is that we're seeing mental health issues among adolescents increasing dramatically, but the lack of treatment and intervention is the one that is so bothersome. So if there are no school counselors available, no school psychologists, or if you're in a rural area and there are no mental health providers in your community, then we're talking about thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of students being graduating from high school with untreated mental health issues. And that is dangerous for many reasons. I could go into what that means as far as workforce issues, not being prepared to work, not being prepared to go on to stable relationships, overall just not being able to be productive citizens. And that will damage and be harmful for all of us.
Thank you. And so on that note, do you believe that canceling $1 billion in federal grants to hire mental health professionals in schools will help or harm these efforts?
Harm.
Thank you. Different students also have dramatically different needs and experiences when it comes to the use of screens in classrooms. You mentioned this in your opening statement. As schools increasingly impose limits or outright bans on cell phones and other devices, we know that disability advocates are increasingly concerned that these policies could impede access to much-needed assistive technology that students with disabilities rely on in the classroom, either technology that is on the student's phone or tablet. Under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, as well as the Americans with Disability Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, students have a right to access assistive technology in the classroom. Can you also talk about how schools can avoid restricting the access to assistive technology while they are setting policies to limit access to screens and devices during school hours?
Yeah, I think, I'm a researcher myself, and I appreciate good research. And the research on cell phone bans is on one type of device. But like my daughter, for instance, with special needs and communication disorders, it was imperative that she had a tablet during school to be able to communicate with others, right? So this tablet, the use of this tablet is screen time, but it is helpful screen time so that she can communicate. I think it's important for future research to show the differences between the different types of devices that are present in schools so that we are not banning all screen time for students because it could be helpful to some and harmful to others. So we need more research that will help inform policy. And so that's what I'm here, the critical issue for us. To determine in the future is what types of devices have the most harm.
Right.
And I believe that the research on cell phones in schools it's true and it's distracting. It's causing problems and harm to students. But there are other devices in schools as well that can enhance learning. And so I think we need to look at that very carefully.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful. And I think the final note to make sure that we aren't just implementing one-size-fits-all solutions, be important to be research-based and make decisions that are according as such. Thank you.
I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Nye, I want to ask you about some of your experiences and successes in Utah. And I've always been a fan of taking notes by hand and reading books rather than on screens. I've always kind of felt intuitively that this is a more cognitively beneficial way of doing things. And now, as we've discussed, there's actually a lot of research to bear that out. At the same time, just a couple months ago, we held a hearing where I expressed my view that technology, and in particular AI, has the potential to close achievement gaps and elevate student achievement in ways that we've perhaps never seen before. I don't actually believe that these 2 points of view are inconsistent. I actually think that one of the benefits of emergent technologies is there's the potential to liberate us from our screens. I think there's a growing consensus that the next major computing platform likely won't be screen-based, but will be more integrated with the real world. But even looking at some of the different modalities by which AI tools can be advanced now, you have video, you have voice. So you can imagine, for example, a student that's reading a book or doing a math problem that is able to ask a question just by using their voice and then get an answer that they can hear, so that they're not forced to go to a screen and look something up and get pulled into something else. So have you seen examples of that where you can kind of use emerging technologies in a way that actually liberates us from screens and enriches instruction?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman Kiley. I mean, to be clear, to remove technology or suggest that we do so out of a classroom altogether would be a disservice to our students. And so when we're thinking about the appropriate use, what is that technology-enhanced classroom versus that technology-driven classroom? And what we're primarily concerned is what are those, the device itself, whether it's school-provided device or the one that we carry on us as a smartphone, is only as good as what its intended use is for. And the concern and the thing that we're wrestling with in the classroom is when the device is used inappropriately or for means otherwise not associated or attributed to the educational and learning progression process, right? The other aspect of it, to your point, that technology-enhanced classroom absolutely is a place, and our students need to be able to identify the appropriate uses of those, as you've discussed, as well as the AI integration and even blended classroom opportunities. There's a better balance, clearly, not only in the instruction side of it, but of course, we're working to address all those negative uses of the devices as well.
Yeah, and everything is changing so fast that it's, I think, really important for us to be hearing from you about what you're seeing in your classrooms so that we can share best practices and respond accordingly. Dr. Twenge, I also wanted to ask you about your research on brain science, because we've learned a lot about what these devices actually do to the developing brain. I think it was actually Dr. Nye mentioned there's something like 280 notifications the average student gets a day from their phone. And we've learned about sort of the cheap dopamine hits that, that things like social media provide, and then it kind of gets you into this vicious cycle where you need more and more of a hit in order, and you know, and the reward is actually less, so then you're doing it more and more, and then it actually sort of undercuts your ability to you know, engage in more fulfilling activities like relationships with friends and that sort of thing. Could you kind of expand on how these devices are actually rewiring the developing brain?
Yeah, and I want to be clear, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I haven't really, you know, done fMRI studies or any of that. But what we do know is the effect on attention span and how people end up feeling a compulsion, you know, to take that phone out every time it buzzes. And adults feel that. And then think about being 10 and having your first smartphone. And that trains the brain to have that, oh, it's buzzing, take it out. And that happens in school all the time, which is why that bell-to-bell policy is much better, because of maybe they have access to the phone in their pocket, they're not supposed to take it out during class, but they know it's there, they know it's gonna buzz, and they have that response. So this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, is that we have these devices which have radically shortened attention span to the point where many students can't make it through a book, even a short book. So a lot of high schools in English class no longer require students to read books. They've given up. They only read essays and short stories. Even outside of school, so leisure reading is really important for developing empathy, for developing attention span, for learning things. And the number of high school seniors who read anything, a book, magazine, newspaper, anything longer form, every day, in the 70s and 80s, it was 60% who did that every day. And in more recent years, in the big national surveys, it's more like 17%. So we see this huge, huge decline in reading books and being able to pay attention for that long.
It's very troubling. Well, thank you very much for sharing your perspective, and I think that, maybe at some point later in the hearing, if you had any tips as well for parents as to kind of little tweaks that you can make, maybe turning off notifications would be a good one, right? Because then you get one, and then you pull out the phone and you check your whatever it might be, Instagram message, and then, oh, here's a reel, and suddenly you're on your phone for 30 more minutes. So we'd love to hear more about that as well. But my time is up, so I will now recognize the representative from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to just start by saying that, the prevalence and the phenomenon of screen time is, I think, concerning for all of us. There's no doubt that screens are incredibly prevalent in classrooms right now. And there is no questioning the need to understand how that technology is affecting students' learning and their well-being. We know that children and teens' interaction with digital devices can lead to depression, to anxiety, and other concerning health outcomes. And we need to talk about it. And we also need to address it. But what my concern is that Republicans are just giving lip service to mental health right now because the administration is ending grants, and we've heard it, grants that over 250 school districts relied on to hire school counselors and social workers. And it makes me wonder how the Republicans are going to ask us to have a genuine conversation about harmful effects of screen time in schools when they're enabling the administration to dismantle the Department of Education and any support structures that we have for schools, program by program, like nickel and dime. Republicans are asking schools to address students' mental health while leaving them with very little support to actually do anything about it. So take the Institute for Education Sciences. The Department of Education has cut nearly $900 million in IES contracts, and the majority of IES employees were dismissed. This abruptly stopped ongoing research, including an evaluation examining whether mental health interventions were working. When states, districts, and schools make policies around screen time, they turn to data and research to understand the scope of the problem and what solutions could actually work. So how are we going to ask schools to make evidence-based policies around screen time while simultaneously cutting off the production of the evidence that they need? Educators are already stretched incredibly thin, and now we're going to ask them to be data scientists and researchers too. So Dr. Holcomb McCoy, why is it so important to invest in the Institute of Education Sciences? What role, and I know we've mentioned it in your opener, and it has been mentioned, but what role specifically does IS data and research play in developing policies around using digital devices in school?
Thank you for that question, because research is so important in education to guide practice as well as policymaking. And what IES different, if you compare to state-level research, IES was a setting for, it was an opportunity for researchers to do longer longitudinal studies, multi-state research, to look at comparisons across many different school districts, many different states. It was a center for research that answered some of these important questions around practice and policy. For instance, when I was at Johns Hopkins University, I was part of an IES grant that looked at special education referrals, and it was a grant in which we looked at Baltimore schools, but Maryland schools in general, and looking at new interventions and really testing those interventions by randomized trials to see if it actually had the impact that we hypothesized in the beginning. The research that comes out of IES was so important to the work of educators because it gave us more rigorous evaluation of the policies and the practices, innovative practices that we thought would really work. So it's all about tell us what works, so that we're not, involved in practices anymore because we think they work. We need to know that they work through the rigorous evaluation. And so that is what IES gave us. It gave us a center for research for researchers from our member institutions. As a part of AACTE, had many IES grants that were canceled that stopped the investigation of some of the most innovative practices.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll submit my second question to the record, but I want to conclude by saying that the bottom line is that as students are facing increasing mental health challenges, schools need more, not less, support to keep up with the evolving technology that may be contributing to the problem. This committee should be working to ensure that schools have the funding and the resources they need to understand and implement those best practices for the students. The committee should be working to ensure policies around technology in schools address the growing digital divide, for instance, because while some schools are dealing with more and more screens, others are fighting for the bare minimum to teach students basic digital literacy. The committee could be working to provide adequate oversight to ad tech companies who are sharing students' personal data with third parties. But in order for these discussions to lead somewhere meaningful to improve students' mental health and learning and safety, we need the Institute of Education Services, the Office of Education Technology, and a fully staffed, fully funded Department of Education. And I thank you so much for your time, and I yield back.
The representative from North Carolina, Mr. Harris, is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our panel for your presence here today for this very informative hearing and an issue that I think is extremely concerning to parents all across our country. And I believe most of us, as we've heard today, can agree that when used correctly, technology can be an invaluable educational tool that can enhance a student's classroom learning experience. However, unfortunately, as we've also heard right here today, every school district in the country has experienced the detrimental effects excessive screen time has on our children. So there's a couple of questions that come to mind I'd like to ask today. Dr. Nye, first of all, while Utah Senate Bill 178 created a statewide framework, what flexibility did it provide or does it provide for school districts to adapt the policy to meet the unique needs of the communities?
Well, thank you for the question. The bill itself has some permissive language in it that would allow a local district, while setting a statewide expectation that phones aren't to be used during instructional time. If a local district, working with their constituents, those local boards and patrons of the district were to decide, hey, there's this element that we need maybe a little more flexibility with, as long as they write their policy, and the expectation is that they do their own policy, that is in keeping with the intent of the statewide expectation, but also identifies specific allowances within their community or within their school. That is certainly acceptable under the law.
Super. And I'll lead a follow-up to you, Dr. Gibbons. In your experience, how important is it for local school districts to have the freedom and support of the state and even the federal government to make decisions that are in the best interest of their local students?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. I agree with you 100%. The autonomy of a local school district is really, really important. Every school district is different. Every community is different. And to have the ability to have meaningful discussions with not only the principal of the school, for example, but the community that surrounds that school is priceless. We need to continue with that, whether it be a cell phone policy or other policies that would affect their students. We need to have buy-in from everyone. Schools were built around communities. That is the community, the hub of a community, and especially in Richardson, Texas, we have schools that are the hub of the community. So if we alienate any part of that community, we can not be transparent and have some type of challenge when it comes to trying to do what we think is best. So I agree with you 100%. That autonomy and open conversation is really valuable.
Thank you, sir. Well, I've long believed that states and school districts and parents are the ones best suited to address issues directly affecting their students. In fact, in my own home state of North Carolina, there are currently multiple bills that are working their way through the General Assembly that would empower schools to restrict or limit phone use within their own schools. I believe we've got to get the federal government out of the way of the states, school districts, and parents and really get back to empowering them to make decisions that are in the best interest of their students. I will ask one more question. Dr. Gibbons, you stated, I enjoyed reading your testimony, that teacher retention rates stand between 84 and 94% following the implementation of the new policy. How does that compare to retention rates in previous years?
Yes, sir, that is definitely higher as compared to different previous years. As a district, I think we probably 85% retention rate as a district. Over the last several years, it has been higher and lower, it's fluctuated, but we have several campuses where it has gone to upper 90s or mid 90s, and we have teachers who've made testimony around they drive by 7, 8 schools on their way to the campus in which they're teaching at because of the policy that the school has in place around cell phones and just the comfort that they feel of not having to worry about that. So yes, sir, we've seen an increase in our cell phone policy campuses where we've had the ability to really see teachers stay, and we know with teachers stay, they build capacity with not only their students, but as teachers, and we've seen it as a really positive thing.
And for the record, you are hearing from teachers themselves that this is something they want, and that this is why they are staying there in the retention rate.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you again for your testimony, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Since we have about 20 seconds, maybe Dr. Twangy, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add to my earlier question about some good habits or maybe nudges for how use can be limited?
Well, I mean, the first thing for parents is put off giving your kid an internet-enabled phone, a smartphone, as long as possible. And it's really tough for parents because many of them, their kids say, well, I'm the only one. So parents are trying to come together to agree that they're not going to give their kids a phone until later. So the rule in my own house is you get your first smartphone when you get your driver's license. So you have to be at least 16 and then have that freedom of that driver's license. So before that, our kids have had flip phones or phones designed for kids that don't allow internet and social media. That also helps during the school day, then that phone is not as attractive and interesting to pick up. But there are these really specific things, as you mentioned, to talk to your kids about turning off notifications once they do get that smartphone. The other really, really important rule is no phones in the bedroom overnight. And that's for adults too, if you possibly can. You will sleep better and longer if that phone isn't available. And then put those parental controls on so it shuts down at night. And so even at 16, they can't download apps because social media doesn't verify age, doesn't require parental permission. So your kid might have TikTok or Instagram, and you may not even know it. That happens even with 10 and 11-year-olds. So when they do get that phone, having that parental control in place that they have to have your permission to download an app is very important.
Yeah, great tips. Maybe some of them applicable to adults as well as young people. Now recognize the representative from North Carolina, Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. We all agree that technology is transforming education, but we also know that how we use it matters. Too much screen time, unstructured or unmonitored, can have real consequences on students' attention spans, on their mental health, and on their academic success. At the same time, when integrated thoughtfully, technology can open doors. It can personalize learning. It can create opportunities for students who might otherwise be left behind. But only if we're investing in all of our students, and that's where I want to begin. Last Congress, this committee passed a bill that would divert public dollars to public schools with no real accountability. Private schools don't have to follow the same civic rights protections. They're not bound by IDEA. They don't face the same transparency standards as our public schools. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle won't argue with you on that because that's the truth. Dr. Holcomb-McCoy, in your view, what are the constitutional and civil rights concerns that we should keep in mind as we expand school choice and privatization? And are there risks in removing the federal protections that ensure that all students, regardless of race, background, or ability, receive a fair and equal education?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Adams, for that great question. I think, yes, there are civil rights concerns around the equal access to success and the same technology, the same policies that promote success for students. Our constitutional right to ensure that every student has access to the same opportunities. That is really important. And as we talk about screen time in different schools and different policies, and as we're talking today about some schools having success with cell phone bans and others do not, then you wonder whether or not some students are not having the same opportunity for success than others. And so if you think about the different schools having, and there being no federal oversight as far as having equal access, then that could be troubling because we could have more screen exposure to some students and not to others.
Okay. Well, let's move on to screen time and mental health. We've heard a lot today about the risks of excessive screen time, especially for younger students. But the issue isn't just how much time students spend on screens. It's also how that time is spent and what kind of learning is taking place. Dr. Holcomb-McCoy, how can schools better balance the integration of technology with the need for social emotional growth and interpersonal connection in classrooms? And what does thoughtful, effective tech integration look like, especially for students who are already vulnerable?
Yeah, thank you for that question as well. I am encouraged that, there are policies that are keeping students engaged during school time, but we still have out-of-school time where students are engaging in possibly inappropriate exposure to screens and different content through their cell phones and other devices. And so when we're thinking about in your question as far as how to be a healthy citizen, a digital citizen, how to regulate yourselves, parents having the information, the tips to help students really understand how to be a citizen that understands the pitfalls to too much screen time and also what works and what will help them and enhance their livelihood and their productivity. So that is what I would like to see us train teachers to be able to help students become healthy digital citizens.
Okay, let me get to my next question if I can.
All right.
In North Carolina, we have more than 100,000 English learning students, one of the largest populations in the country. And I want to clear up a misconception. The vast majority are native born, but many attend schools that lack the funding, the staffing, or the training to fully meet their needs. And so, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a 2019 report from the North Carolina Justice Center, which lays out how our students is underfunding the limited English efficiency allotment. Dr. McCoy, what role can technology play in making classrooms more inclusive and effective for English learners, particularly in underfunded states like North Carolina?
Well, first, I know that English language learners, as they're learning English, for instance, possibly need devices to help them with translations, to help them read better, the pausing, reading passages. There are some best practices in using technology to help them develop the language acquisition. At the same time, we don't have enough research to know the possible pitfalls or the harm that screen time can have. Going back to the research piece again, we need to know more about what works with English language learners, a population in our country that, going back to your question around civil rights, we want to make sure that we are doing the best, using the best educational practices, instructional practices for every population of students. So that's really important.
Thank you. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, and I did not hear an objection to your unanimous consent request, so that can be entered into the record. I now recognize the chair of the full committee, Mr. Wahlberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here. I would be remiss as chairman of the full committee to not say what we're hearing today is common sense, right? Simple common sense. The same common sense that Mr. Zemer, my fifth-hour social studies teacher, used when he caught me, though doing the best I could to run that earphone up my sleeve to my ears so I could listen on my transistor radio to the World Series. He understood through common sense that the World Series and social studies and the learning of social studies at the time didn't go well together. He wasn't opposed to the World Series. He wasn't opposed to me enjoying athletics, but he wanted more of the opportunity to educate me. And I think we're talking common sense here. We know that cell phones and smartphones are hurting our kids when they're not controlled. We know that they're affecting our classrooms. We know that our teachers are frustrated with it. And we know that when we get it right for students, parents, and teachers, education works. And so I appreciate the school districts here represented that have taken the step to say, enough already. We understand we're in this century, and we're going to have more with AI and technology, and we ought to use it. But there are some things that helicopter parents and others got to get used to, that their kids will do just fine if they're in a classroom where education is first and foremost, and not social media. We know that research will inform us on that, but we don't need some of the research. We've seen it already. And I agree that we should not have the federal government stepping in, but we ought to encourage states and especially local districts and especially parents to step up to the plate and say, enough, enough. Let's get back to what really works in education. So thank you for being here, and thank you for listening to my rant. I am chairman, so I can do that, right? Expected of me. No objection. Dr. Twiney, you referenced studies comparing reading comprehension on screens versus paper. What did those studies show, and why might reading on screens produce different outcomes than reading on paper?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got some of those experiments now that show, most of them are with college students, when they take notes on paper versus taking notes on a laptop, they tend to do better, especially on comprehensive exams, things that take more thought. And I think the brain mechanisms behind that are still to be explored, but we have a challenge in education finding that balance between using technology for what it's good for, but then making sure that that individual use of technology doesn't interfere with learning. So front of room technology, showing a video that everyone is seeing or using those types of resources, that clearly has benefits. But whether that individual one-to-one policy of K through 12 students having that laptop or tablet with them all the time, that does not seem to have had the benefits that people were hoping for, given what we've seen in test scores, for example.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Gibbons, you mentioned magnetically sealed pouches being used or simply restricting the phone usage. Are you seeing any difference in effectiveness or compliances between those two approaches? If so, what are the reasons?
Yes, sir, we are seeing a little bit of a difference. As a district, we implemented a phone-free policy and then offered the opportunity for campuses that were interested or felt like it was a need to use the Yonder pouches, which are the magnetically sealed pouches. And so from the very beginning, we knew that everyone had the same expectation, but how they reached that and how they did that was up to them. And so when we look at, for example, instructional time on campuses, when you look at, and forgive me for simplifying this, but we have our non-Yonder campuses, the instructional time that they got back was 9 to 10 minutes. For our Yonder campuses, the campuses that were implementing that magnetically sealed bag, it was almost closer to 13 to 14 minutes. Okay. And so there are some percentage discrepancies when it comes to that. We've seen overall improvement, of course, with the implementation of the entire policy, but a little bit of improvement even farther than that with the Yonder pouch.
I appreciate that. I see my time is going to expire, so if somebody wants to yield to me later on, I've got another question for Mr. Nye. I yield back.
Now I recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Holcomb McCoy, Virginia recently implemented a policy restricting cell phone use in schools. One of the things that has occurred to some of us is there might be some financial barriers. Are there any financial barriers in implementing cell phone bans?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about the financial burden on parents or students because of bans. I think in many cases, because the usage of of cell phones really started with parents wanting to be able to communicate with their students. It could be that the financial burden of not using something that they have purchased could be a possibility, but I'm unsure of that question, so I need to get back to you on that.
Is there any financial burden on the school district?
With bans?
Right.
Well, the possibility of how do you enforce school cell phone bans could be a possible financial obligation on the part of the school district. But if you weigh, I'm thinking about weighing, the cost of hiring more counselors and mental health professionals and the cost of saving students in comparison to the cost compared to hiring to monitor school bans and what that will do as far as disciplinary actions and others. I don't know that, but that's an important question, I think, for local school districts to really look at very carefully.
You mentioned, you mentioned discipline. Do any school bans include sanctions on students that might get them caught up in a school-to-prison pipeline?
Yes, I think that's a real issue that should be explored after the bans have been in place for a period of time, to look very carefully at the data of who's being disciplined for having a phone anyway. Those are the data points that I think that we don't know enough about yet that really should be examined in the future.
Are there any educational aspects of schooling that may be improved by having personal devices in classrooms?
Yes, earlier today, I talked about even my daughter who has special needs, who has really, her education has been enhanced by the use of screen time through tablets, not necessarily her cell phone, but by the use of tablets and other types of devices. And so when you're calculating screen time and not just cell phone time for her, it was important to have screen time on other devices, and that did enhance her ability to learn. And that's the case for other children with disabilities and other different learning styles and needs.
There's studies that show that teachers are more likely to use education technology if they feel competent in its application, but we've cut funding for teacher quality partnerships and supporting effective educator development. Why is it important for the federal government to continue its commitment to supporting educator preparation and development as we see the rise of technology in the classroom?
Yeah, well, I'm not opposed to policies that increase learning. So cell phone bans could be, we might see an increase in academic achievement. But one thing that we do know through our research over many years is that teachers play a critical role. The effectiveness of teachers and teacher quality plays an effective role in academic achievement. So training teachers, preparation for teachers and educators in this digital age is so important. We have many teachers who are not trained to use technology responsibly in a classroom. There could be positive screen time that could be working to the benefit of students. And so educator preparation, teacher preparation is still key. It's important when we're talking about academic achievement, academic progress. The quality of our teachers, their preparation in classrooms is still key, no matter what.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The representative from Guam, Mr. Moylan, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Nye, since COVID-19, of course, many schools have kept portions of their online learning model. And computers and the internet have become increasingly integrated into the classroom. And in fact, if you don't have one, it seems like your school is outdated. The students are even learning the usage of these electronic devices probably faster than the teachers, definitely faster than I can. So we got to get this balance. So what policies can local school districts and the state the state governments consider where we can place this balance for modern learning and at the same time limiting the non-academic screen time?
Thank you. So as far as the policies are concerned, really what that instructional progression looks like, technology ought to be a part of that in some way. And what districts are doing right now in Utah and across several of them, they're analyzing the degree that they're incorporating the use of those devices as part of their instruction. And so as much as we're asking students to limit some of their screen time, several districts are identifying, well, they ought to limit some of the use of their screen time because it's become over-dependent. I had one student that tugged on my suit coat when I was visiting a school and says, help. And I said, well, what's going on? He says, well, unfortunately, I feel like all we do is open up the laptop and we start working and there's little interaction there. And clearly that would be inappropriate. And so measures are being taken to say, well, if that to that extreme is not conducive to learning, then how do we just incorporate that or find that better balance? And so districts right now, schools right now, parents are asking the same questions, students are rising to the front saying, well, technology is clearly important in the classroom, however, to what degree should it be used? And that looks, and in some cases, as has been noted, that varies from student to student at times. But in that general tier 1 instruction, that primary instruction, we do need to find a better balance, and those are the questions that we're asking in our classrooms.
I can picture that student that will be like me. I prefer the interaction with the instructor. They're the motivating part for me. And one teacher will go a certain way, but if I change my teacher, wow, I got a straight A. So there's a big difference. Thank you for pointing that out. Also, another question for you, please. You know, our biggest concern about limiting access to phones in schools and communicating with students during emergencies. So how can school districts adapt policies that balance the student safety with proper learning environments?
Yeah, one of the biggest questions or concerns that we received from parents was to that point, saying, I would love to get a hold of my student during the day, or they need to get a hold of me if there's an emergency at the school. And what we find, though, even our first responders have suggested, and we've experienced where inaccurate information is communicated during an emergency that has further complicated our first responders' ability to engage for a lot of different reasons. So there does need to be a better balance there. Our policies in Utah do allow for exigent circumstances for students to have access to their devices in the case of emergency. However, that balance is tenuous at best, because at times it can actually hinder our first responders in their efforts to see to. And of course, I'm speaking to a large emergency where first responders are involved, and maybe it's a situation where our students feel like they need to communicate, or parents need to find out that their child is safe. All those things are very valid, and so we are seeking to find a better balance in that.
I appreciate that's very important as well, the proper information coming on down. Excellent, thank you. Dr. Twangy, girls seem to spend a large percentage of their day engaged in social media. They're a lot faster than I am with their thumbs. They're on the machines too. Your research analysis shows a rise in depression, self-harm, suicide, and other forms of mental health struggle, especially in young girls. Could you explain the specific harms girls are facing from their exposure to social media, and how reducing access during school hours might help support student mental health?
Thank you for that question. So we have seen extremely concerning rises in depression. It's doubled since 2012, and that's not diagnosed depression. That's from a screening study, so it can't be due to greater help seeking or changes in diagnoses. That's based on DSM symptoms of depression among adolescents. Among girls in particular, we've seen really large increases in suicide and in self-harm. So as just one example, the CDC keeps data on emergency room admissions for self-harm. Those have it quintupled, increased by a factor of 5 among 10 to 14-year-old girls, so the youngest group. So there's a number of mechanisms of harm here. First, if you're spending 5 hours a day on social media, as the average US teen now does, that's a lot less time for sleep, less time for interacting with friends and family in person, less time for just appreciating what's around you. And then there's the specific harms of comparing yourself, especially with body image, on platforms like Instagram, and the competition for likes and followers, seeing what everyone else is doing without you. And I could go on, but you get the idea of there's really, really severe harms, particularly to girls.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The representative from Indiana, Mr. Messmer, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here. Dr. Nye, I understand as a superintendent, you led a pilot program in your district that implemented a cell phone restriction. Could you share what you observed during that process and what lessons you've taken away from the experience?
And so a few years ago, before statewide expectations, we identified it as an issue. And working with a few junior high schools and one high school, we identified what would be a bell-to-bell restriction. And what we identified there is data is very important to track to see what the effect is, right? This is the intervention, what are the outcomes? What we noticed in that, first of all, the students for the first 2 weeks really struggled. And I visited the school before the restriction took place, and I just made a casual observation in the lunchroom, and heads were buried in their phones, and very little interaction was occurring. Follow up, fast forward, when the restriction was in place, I was in the lunchroom. Students are talking to each other, they're engaging, they're laughing, they're having a much better time, more interactive time. I would say as far as the data is concerned, over the course of those 3 years, we've seen an increase in proficiency in ELA, math, and science, both not only in the proficiency, but in the growth in those academic content areas, as well as student discipline improving. What was once, office referrals, I'll use this for instance, the number of office referrals decreased by 43%. These are the students that, for whatever reason, they've engaged inappropriately in the classroom, and they need to go take a little, take it to the principal's office, so to speak. Those are reduced by 43%. So wildly in favor, and parents have adjusted and appreciate it as well.
Thank you. Dr. Gibbons, last year there were almost 50,000 teacher positions in your state, unfilled or filled by someone who was not certified for that position. Do you believe the policies restricting cell phone usage could play a role in improving the overall classroom environment and therefore incentivize more qualified teachers to join the workforce?
Yes, sir. I do. The idea of having a qualified, certified teacher in a classroom is the best case scenario for any student. And although we do have alternatively certified teachers and have a wealth of experience in the outside world coming into the classroom, which is beneficial, having a certified teacher in the classroom, there's no other way to do that. And so the idea of having teachers who want to come to our district, for example, because we have a cell phone free policy and because we have maybe less discipline, less opportunities for that teacher to have to engage around a phone, the better. And so anytime that we can get a certified teacher in a classroom, we're going to be benefiting both not only for the campus, but for the students.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Twangy, you quoted a headmaster in your written testimony saying that students can retreat into short-term safety of their phones rather than tolerate the discomfort that often precedes finding one's way into a conversation. Can you talk about the short-term and long-term dangers of that type of phone-dependent coping behavior?
So this is something I hear from my undergraduate students a lot as well, that they feel a lot of anxiety in social situations. And ironically, some of that anxiety comes from their phones, that they are used to communicating via text instead of speaking to people in person. But it also comes from the nervousness that a lot of people, particularly young people, feel around something called phubbing, which is a combination of phone and snubbing. It's where you're talking to someone and they take out their phone. Everybody does it, but everybody hates it. And so you never know when you're talking to your friend when he or she is going to take out that phone. And then you think, well, what's going on? Am I boring? What did I say? And it's this very unhealthy dynamic. So they really interfere with that natural development of social skills during that crucial time of adolescence. And students know this. I had a sophomore at high school in Texas where I was speaking come up to me and say, I really want to talk to my friends at lunch, but they want to play games on their phone. What can I do? My heart broke a little bit because what can he do? But if his phone has, if his school has that no phones during the school day bell-to-bell policy where they're not allowed to take them out during lunch, that problem is instantly solved.
Excellent. Well, thank you for all of your answers, and Chairman, I yield back.
Chair Wahlberg, you want to take a shot with the last 30 seconds?
I would love to. Thank you. Dr. Nye, you mentioned the role of state and local entities in this issue. Why was it important for your governor to pursue a statewide approach?
For us, we recognized that it was a statewide issue. And while local effort clearly could have taken place before that statewide expectation, it seemed to be slow and sporadic. And so as we identified, surveying what the conditions were across schools throughout Utah, identified that there was a lot to be gained through a statewide expectation.
That push or incentive. Okay. Okay, I appreciate that. I yield back.
Thanks very much. Ranking Member Bonamici, we've both been without our phones for 2 hours. How are you managing?
I'm doing pretty well, actually. I didn't miss my phones, and I think without a doubt, it helped me concentrate.
This is my yield to you for your closing statement.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I truly have appreciated the discussion today, and I learned a lot on the effects of screen time on students. But I want to reiterate that it's really crucial to recognize that there are many other issues within our jurisdiction that demand our attention. Yes, this is important, but we can't pretend that everything is normal when the recent actions by the Trump administration and this proposed, what I call the big bad ugly bill, present significant threats to the well-being of students and the integrity of our public education system. The abrupt cancellation of the student mental health funding established under the bipartisan, I emphasize bipartisan, Safer Communities Act has left many school districts without funding that provided critical support services and access to behavioral health care. The proposed elimination, as we've heard, of the Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology and IES, the Institute of Education Sciences, again, would remove vital resources for schools that are striving to integrate technology efficiently and equitably, but also in light of everything we heard today in a way that's going to really help students be more successful. And it's also very concerning that the proposed cuts to Medicaid and SNAP in this reconciliation bill would strip away critical support for millions of families, including children. The programs are not just safety nets, they're lifelines that give students the stability they need to succeed academically. And as we've seen, these issues are not abstract. They have real tangible consequences in the lives of students across the country, and I know all of the witnesses, I really appreciated your testimony today. I also want to note that we have heard in this committee room and in public, the administration and members of this committee talk about the NAEP scores as a reason why they need to get rid of the Department of Education. NAEP scores are down, therefore we don't need the Department of Education. We should turn everything back to the states. I think what we heard today make a case for protecting the Department of Education, particularly in research and its research capacity, protecting the funding that was provided by Congress for those grants to help with mental health care access. And I think this is a place where we could make the case that it's much more complex. Why are the NAEP scores down? We heard a lot today about how students can't concentrate, how they can't focus, how they're distracted. So I just want to add that because it's a complex issue, but the fact that the NAEP scores are down is not a reason to eliminate the Department of Education. In fact, it's a reason to ask why can't we do better? So I urge all my colleagues to focus on restoring that funding for access to mental health services, protecting the Department of Education, especially its research capacity, and focusing on policies that will give every child the opportunity to learn and thrive. Thank you again for your excellent testimony, and I yield back. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, that you will tell us how you're doing after the 2 hours without your phone.
I think I'm doing all right, but you do after a while just start to say, where's my phone, right? So it'd be good if we can get out of those habits. But I think it's been a great hearing. I want to thank all the witnesses for your outstanding testimony and insights. And other than a few tangents here and there, it's been mostly bipartisan, which I really appreciate as well. You know, it's been around 20 years since we had the arrival of this miracle where each of us has a supercomputer in our pocket that lets us instantly access the world's information and press a button and a car shows up to take you wherever you want to go and maybe meet your future spouse and anything else that you can imagine. And the adoption was so rapid and so exciting and so transformative that we never really stopped to pause and consider, okay, what's the etiquette around this new technology and what is it doing to us as individuals and our values as a society and to our young people. And I really worry about this generation of young people that has grown up never knowing a world without smartphones, and then having gone through the COVID experience as well, which sort of habituated the idea that digital connection is a substitute for real world connection. So I think that we've got some really good takeaways from today's hearing. First is the idea that when it comes to instructional time, there should be an expectation of no use of personal devices. Now, how far that policy extends beyond that basic idea is subject to some debate, but that seems to be a pretty clear takeaway from the testimony and the evidence we've considered, is that schools do a lot better when they have that expectation, no personal device use during instructional time. And then secondly, when it comes to school-issued devices, that we ought to be strategic in terms of how we deploy them. So for example, their use should be time limited. They should be used for activities where having the device actually adds value. So for example, you don't need to necessarily have an e-reader just to look at a document. Maybe you read a book or a printout instead, but where the technology adds value, that's when you want to utilize it. And then also we want to use them in a way that assists teachers and empowers teachers to do the sort of things that only teachers can do, as opposed to sort of replacing the role of the teacher. A third principle to take away is the importance of local control. That while we have this expectation that we want to set, that Utah has set, for example, on a statewide level, that these are really complicated questions, and it's important to have an ongoing dialogue with parents, with the community, get feedback from teachers, administrators, and students themselves in order to craft the policy in the right way, and maybe just as importantly, create the right school culture. Because when you go to a school that's really high performing and that has a great school culture, just kind of rules in general are sort of self-enforcing because the students will kind of encourage each other to follow the rules because you don't want to be out of step with that culture. And that's the kind of culture I think you want to establish around the use of devices as well. And then finally, I think we want to really be thinking seriously about how emerging technology gives us opportunities not just to advance student achievement, but also to solve some of our issues related to screens. I mean, we're in a moment that will arguably be just as transformative, if not more so, than the revolution with smartphones. And I think we have the opportunity to kind of learn from that past experience and think seriously about how we can assure that the adoption of new technologies actually serves to reinforce our values and to advance education and the right kind of educational environments for our young people. So thank you again, everyone, for your testimony. Without objection, there being no further business, the committee stands adjourned.